Imagine a lake high in the mountains of Colombia, its waters dark and still in the pale light of dawn. A silence hangs in the air, broken only by the chants of priests standing on the shore. Thousands of people have gathered, their eyes fixed on a single raft that drifts slowly toward the center of the water. On that raft stands a man who glitters as if the sun itself has descended upon him. His skin is coated in sticky resin, and over it clings a dusting of pure gold, turning him into a living statue of light. He is not a god, nor a phantom, but the newly chosen chief of the Muisca people. This is his initiation, the moment when he proves himself worthy to lead. He stands barefoot, the gold shimmering with each movement, while priests scatter emeralds and golden ornaments into the lake as sacred offerings. The water ripples with green and yellow sparks as the treasures sink beneath the surface. From the shore, the crowd raises their voices in unison, a chorus of faith and reverence. For them, this ritual is not a display of wealth. It is a covenant with the divine, a promise that their leader will guide them with balance and harmony. The raft circles once, then twice, until the man steps into the water. The gold clinging to his skin washes away, dispersing into the lake like a cloud of light. What remains is a man reborn, stripped of glitter but adorned with the trust of his people. The crowd erupts in celebration, not for riches, but for renewal. Yet somewhere in the shadows of history, whispers of this ritual traveled beyond the Andes. Outsiders heard not of devotion, but of treasure. They spoke of a man covered in gold, and then of a king who ruled over it, and finally of a city built entirely from it. From this sacred act of offering, the fever of El Dorado was born. Long before the conquistadors set foot in South America, the Muisca people shaped a civilization high on the Altiplano Cundiboyacense, a vast plateau east of what is now Bogotá. Their culture thrived in the mountains during the late 1300s and into the 1500s, long before their rituals were twisted into myths of treasure. For the Muisca, gold was never simply a measure of wealth. It was sacred, a bridge between the human and the divine. To them, the shimmering metal captured the energy of the sun. When shaped into ornaments, tunjos, or votive figures, it became a vessel for prayers. These were not meant to be hoarded or displayed in palaces. They were meant to be given away, surrendered into lakes, rivers, and caves as offerings to the gods who governed nature. At Lake Guatavita, the ritual of the gilded chief carried this philosophy to its peak. Each new leader was chosen not only for strength, but for his ability to embody balance. Before he ruled, he was covered in resin, then rolled in gold dust until his body gleamed like fire. When he waded into the water, he offered himself, along with emeralds and gold ornaments, to the lake. It was not a spectacle of vanity. It was an act of renewal, reaffirming the bond between people and the spiritual world. The community gathered in vast numbers along the lake's edge. Priests sang hymns, nobles watched in solemn silence, and commoners stood shoulder to shoulder, all equal in that moment of devotion. When treasures sank beneath the water's surface, it was believed the gods accepted their prayers, ensuring fertility of the land, harmony in society, and favor for their leader. This worldview shaped every aspect of Muisca life. They farmed maize and potatoes on terraced fields, traded salt and emeralds with distant peoples, and maintained harmony through rituals that tied the visible to the invisible. In their eyes, balance with the cosmos was true wealth. But when Spanish ears first heard of glittering men and treasures cast into lakes, they understood none of this. They saw only gold, waiting to be claimed. In the early 1500s, whispers of strange lands began to echo across Spain. Tales of mountains rich with emeralds, rivers that glittered with gold, and kings who bathed in treasures stirred the imaginations of conquistadors hungry for glory. When the Spanish crown rewarded conquest with titles, land, and wealth, every rumor of abundance became fuel for ambition. By the time the conquistadors reached the highlands of present-day Colombia, they encountered the Muisca people and the stories that surrounded Lake Guatavita. Spanish chroniclers wrote of a chief who emerged as if made of sunlight, covered head to toe in dust of gold. What they heard as proof of unimaginable riches was, in reality, a sacred initiation ritual. Yet through mistranslation, exaggeration, and greed, the story grew. One of the earliest to spread this vision was Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada, who marched inland from the Caribbean coast during the late 1530s. His campaign was brutal. Soldiers hacked their way through forests and crossed rivers swollen by rains, forcing enslaved indigenous porters to carry supplies. Hunger and disease cut down men as often as enemy spears. Yet when they reached the Bogotá Plateau, Quesada and his men saw emeralds sparkling in necklaces, gold adorning temples, and fine woven cloth traded in the markets. To them, this was proof of a hidden empire. In their reports to the crown, the conquistadors magnified every detail. A chief covered in gold became not just a leader but a king of unmeasurable riches. A ritual lake became a vault of treasures. Soon the tale outgrew Colombia itself. If such wealth existed in one place, surely even greater wonders waited beyond. Letters sent to Europe spoke of golden realms, urging more expeditions to follow. What the Spaniards failed to see was the meaning behind the gold. The Muisca did not measure their society by the weight of ornaments, they measured it by their connection to the sacred. Yet in the hands of empire, the gilded chief became El Dorado, no longer a man of ritual but a promise of endless treasure. The Spanish had found not understanding, but a legend that would consume generations. Once the first reports from the Andes reached Spain, the legend of El Dorado began to grow faster than any single explorer could contain it. The gilded chief of the Muisca was retold in letters, sermons, and tavern tales until the image of a man covered in gold dust became something more. By the late 1500s, the story had expanded into that of a golden city, hidden in the jungles of South America, waiting for conquest. Every conquistador with ambition saw himself as the one destined to find it. Soldiers who had once fought in the wars of Italy and Flanders now sailed across the Atlantic, chasing a phantom of wealth. Rival expeditions competed not only for treasure, but also for glory, each hoping to secure favor with the crown or the church. The frenzy was not only military. Cartographers in Europe began sketching mysterious cities into blank corners of maps, their golden towers drawn in ink upon uncharted rivers and valleys. The hunger for El Dorado was not fueled solely by greed. It was also driven by rivalry. The Spanish had already plundered the Aztec and Inca empires, flooding Europe with silver and gold. Portugal, England, and France watched closely, eager to carve their own share of the New World. To admit that the mines of Potosí or the treasures of Tenochtitlan were not the final word was to imagine still greater riches hidden further inland. El Dorado became a prize not only for individual explorers but for empires. In Spain, tales of the Golden Kingdom became so exaggerated that entire valleys of treasure were imagined, guarded by fierce warriors and shrouded by mountains. Priests preached of lands where Christian banners could fly over rivers of gold, while merchants envisioned ships loaded with endless bullion. What had begun as a sacred ritual in the highlands of Colombia had now become a European fever dream, its details blurred and inflated until no one could tell fact from fantasy. This was the moment when obsession took hold. El Dorado was no longer a man or a ritual. It had become an empire in the minds of Europeans, one they believed would rewrite the balance of power if only it could be found. The fever for El Dorado drove men into landscapes they neither understood nor respected. In the mid-1500s, expeditions left Spain's colonial strongholds in Peru and Colombia, striking into jungles, rivers, and mountains in search of the Golden Kingdom. The promise of wealth overruled every caution. What followed were journeys that left trails of bones behind them. One of the most infamous attempts was led by Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of Francisco Pizarro, conqueror of the Inca. Gonzalo marched eastward from Quito with hundreds of soldiers, native porters, and enslaved people. They carried hunting dogs, pigs, and herds of livestock, believing they could carve a road through the Andes into a land of abundance. Instead, they found endless jungle, swamps that swallowed men whole, and rains that turned supplies to rot. Food vanished quickly. Hunger became so severe that soldiers boiled leather straps to chew for strength. Horses were slaughtered, then dogs, and finally the pigs they had brought for feasts of victory. Francisco de Orellana, one of Pizarro's captains, split from the expedition in desperation. He followed a river that grew wider and wider until it became the mighty Amazon. His journey down the river between the years of 1541 and 1542 is remembered for its desperation. Men drifted for months, starving, some reduced to madness. Few survived to tell the tale. The dream of El Dorado had driven them deeper into the unknown than any European had gone before, but they found only exhaustion and despair. Similar expeditions scoured the llanos of Venezuela, the forests of Guyana, and the Orinoco Basin. Each one returned broken, if they returned at all. Indigenous communities forced into labor or slaughtered when they resisted bore the brunt of the devastation. Diseases carried by the invaders swept through villages, leaving silence where once there had been life. No golden city emerged from these journeys, only rivers of suffering, scattered graves, and the bitter taste of failure. Yet each failure did not extinguish the dream. Instead, it pushed it further, convincing the next generation of explorers that perhaps El Dorado lay just beyond the last horizon. As each expedition returned in rags, or failed to return at all, the legend of El Dorado refused to die. Instead, it adapted. By the late 1500s, the Golden Kingdom had become a shape-shifting promise, moving across maps like a mirage. If it was not found in Colombia, then surely it must be in Venezuela. If not in the Orinoco Basin, then perhaps in the Guiana highlands. With every disappointment, the city of gold migrated further into the unknown. Cartographers in Europe began filling blank spaces with shimmering inventions. On maps of the New World, golden cities appeared at the sources of great rivers, tucked into valleys no European had seen. Some maps placed El Dorado in the mountains beyond Quito. Others painted it deep in the jungles of Guyana. To the men who drew these charts, empty paper was opportunity. The unknown could always be imagined as a treasury waiting for discovery. The obsession was not limited to Spaniards. By the early 17th century, English and Dutch adventurers carried the fever northward. Sir Walter Raleigh led expeditions into the Guianas, convinced that El Dorado's riches could rival those of Peru. He returned to England with elaborate tales of gilded kings and shining cities, though little more than scraps of truth. His writings, printed and circulated, spread the dream even further, persuading investors and nobles that El Dorado was still waiting. Each failure only seemed to confirm that the explorers had searched in the wrong place. The phantom city of gold shifted across mountains, plains, and rivers, always retreating beyond reach. It became not just a target, but a test of endurance and faith. Those who sought it told themselves they were on the verge of discovery. Those who failed were certain they had simply taken the wrong path. By the time the 17th century opened, El Dorado had grown far beyond the ritual lake of the Muisca. It was no longer a man, nor even a single kingdom. It had become a continent-wide obsession, a golden ghost that moved wherever ambition pointed a finger on a map. Even as the legend of El Dorado drifted across maps, Lake Guatavita in Colombia remained a point of irresistible fascination. It was the place where the story had first taken root, and for generations, it lured treasure seekers who believed the lake's depths hid a kingdom's ransom in gold. In the late 16th century, Spanish officials made the first serious attempt to drain it. They ordered enslaved laborers to cut a channel through the surrounding hills, hoping the waters would empty into a lower valley. The work was brutal. Men dug with primitive tools in the thin mountain air, collapsing from exhaustion as the muddy banks gave way. When part of the lake finally drained, bits of treasure did emerge. Ornaments, tunjos, and small figures of gold glittered in the muck, proof that offerings had indeed been made. Yet the treasures were meager compared to the grand visions that haunted the minds of conquistadors. Over the centuries that followed, others returned to repeat the effort. In the 19th century, English entrepreneurs financed schemes with new technology, convinced they could succeed where the Spanish had failed. Steam engines and pumps were hauled into the mountains, but the earth proved stubborn. Landslides swallowed equipment, and water returned faster than it could be removed. The lake seemed to resist every intrusion, as if guarding its secrets. In the early 20th century, another company tried again, cutting deep shafts and tunnels. Once more, small offerings appeared, fragments of gold that confirmed the ritual's truth. But the vault of untold wealth never surfaced. The deeper engineers dug, the more the mud threatened to bury their machines. Financial backers withdrew, disappointed by results that never matched the dreams they had purchased. By then, Lake Guatavita had become more than a site of legend. It was a symbol of human obsession. Each attempt to drain it ended in struggle, failure, or ruin. What the Muisca had intended as a place of renewal became, in European eyes, an open chest of treasure waiting to be forced open. Yet the lake never surrendered the fortune outsiders demanded of it, holding tight to its offerings beneath the dark water. The legend of El Dorado gained its most powerful proof not through maps or failed expeditions, but through a discovery made centuries after the Spanish first arrived. In the year 1969, deep in the hills outside Bogotá, a farmer stumbled upon a small cave. Hidden inside was a golden artifact, fragile yet dazzling, that would later be called the Muisca raft. This votive piece was no larger than a hand, yet it carried the weight of centuries of myth. Made of cast gold using the lost wax technique, it depicted a raft laden with figures. At its center stood a man, larger than the rest, his body gleaming, his posture commanding. Around him were attendants, priests, and nobles, each rendered in intricate detail. Beneath their feet, the raft was edged with delicate patterns that suggested the waters of Lake Guatavita. The artifact was a miniature echo of the very ritual that had given rise to the legend. For historians and archaeologists, the Muisca raft confirmed what chronicles and oral traditions had long suggested. The gilded chief was not an invention of conquistador fantasy. He was a man of flesh and bone who, during his initiation, was coated in gold and sailed into the sacred lake while offerings were made. The ritual was real, the symbolism profound, and the gold was meant not for conquest but for surrender to the divine. The artifact quickly became one of Colombia's most treasured national relics, housed today in the Gold Museum of Bogotá. To see it is to glimpse both sides of the story. For the Muisca, it was a piece of devotion, embodying their belief that wealth must flow back to the gods. For Europeans, it became further fuel for the fever of El Dorado, proof in metal that the gilded man had existed, though twisted in meaning. In its delicate form, the Muisca raft bridges the gap between legend and reality. It is not the city of gold that explorers imagined, but it is evidence that the myth's roots were planted in truth. The artifact does not speak of kingdoms hidden in the jungle. It speaks of ritual, renewal, and a sacred covenant that outsiders could never truly understand. By the time centuries of expeditions had come and gone, El Dorado was no longer just a story of exploration. It had become a mirror of human desire, reflecting both the hunger for power and the blindness of greed. What began as a sacred act of devotion by the Muisca people had been twisted into one of the most enduring myths of empire. For the Muisca, gold was sunlight made solid. To cast it into lakes and rivers was to maintain harmony with the gods, ensuring that crops flourished and society remained in balance. Wealth meant nothing if it was hoarded. Its purpose was to circulate between people and spirits, a cycle of renewal rather than accumulation. The gilded chief entering Lake Guatavita embodied this philosophy. He was not displaying wealth, he was offering it away. For the Spanish, however, the ritual became a promise of endless riches. In their eyes, the shimmering man was not a leader in prayer, but a king of unimaginable wealth. The lake was not a sacred space, but a treasury waiting to be plundered. This misunderstanding, fueled by ambition and rivalry, drove men into jungles where they starved, drowned, or perished in battle. The more elusive El Dorado became, the more powerful it grew in the European imagination. The legend also revealed the wider machinery of empire. By chasing El Dorado, the Spanish justified conquest, forced labor, and the spread of disease that devastated indigenous communities. Other nations joined in, each eager to stake their claim on the myth. El Dorado was never simply about gold, it was about control. Whoever found it would reshape the balance of Europe's empires. Yet in the end, no city of gold ever appeared. The maps filled with phantom kingdoms faded, and the jungles swallowed the graves of those who searched. What endured was not a discovery but a lesson. El Dorado became a parable of greed, showing how easily ritual can be corrupted, how a gift of renewal can be turned into a curse of ambition. The true legacy of El Dorado lies not in wealth uncovered, but in the way it exposes the choices of men. Where the Muisca saw devotion, empire saw conquest. Where one culture found balance, another found obsession. Today, Lake Guatavita still lies quiet in the mountains of Colombia. Its circular shape glimmers under the shifting sky, surrounded by steep green slopes. To the untrained eye, it might appear as nothing more than a tranquil body of water, yet its depths carry centuries of longing, loss, and legend. Pilgrims of history still climb to its rim, gazing across the dark waters and imagining what might rest beneath the surface. Divers have searched, engineers have dug, and storytellers have painted it as the doorway to a golden empire. Each generation has tried to claim its secrets, yet the lake remains as enigmatic as ever. Standing at its edge, it is not difficult to imagine the ancient ritual. The air filled with smoke from fires on the shore, priests chanting in rhythm, and thousands of voices hushed in reverence. At the center of the lake, a raft drifts silently. Upon it stands a man covered in shimmering dust of gold. For a moment he embodies the sun itself, then he steps into the water, dissolving his brilliance into the depths. The gold is gone, but what lingers is renewal, a sacred bond between people and their gods. This is the true El Dorado, not the city mapped in fantasies, nor the kingdom chased by conquistadors, but a spiritual act misunderstood by outsiders. The lake has never surrendered the vast treasures imagined by empires, and perhaps that is the point. Its value lies not in what can be taken from it, but in what it continues to symbolize. For the Muisca, it was harmony. For the Spanish, it became a curse of ambition. For us today, it is a reminder that the richest treasures are not always meant to be owned. They are meant to be honored, guarded, and remembered. The story of El Dorado is one of transformation. It began with a single man covered in gold dust, offering himself and his people's devotion to the lake. It grew into a tale of kingdoms of treasure, charted onto maps and pursued by desperate expeditions that scarred both land and people. In the end, no golden city was ever found, but something deeper endures. El Dorado reveals the human tendency to see what we desire most, even when it is not truly there. To the Muisca, gold was sunlight made sacred, a bridge to the divine. To Europeans, it became the measure of power and empire. The same ritual, seen through different eyes, gave birth to two opposing worlds, one of balance and one of conquest. When we speak of El Dorado now, we are not only telling a story of exploration, we are telling a story of how myths shape choices, how greed blinds judgment, and how cultures can misunderstand one another with devastating consequences. Perhaps the real El Dorado was never lost. It still glimmers in the values we choose to hold, in the way we measure wealth, and in the rituals we preserve. The lake remains, quiet and steadfast, holding its secrets beneath the water. And maybe that is the lesson. Some treasures are not meant to be taken. They are meant to remind us of who we are and of what we seek when we chase dreams of gold.